Take vote. Playing chair, we are in session. Oh,
recording in progress.
Okay, we are in session. I'd like to call this meeting of the March 18th Finance Committee to order. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish nations on whose traditional territories I have the honor to live, including my home on Huete, also known as Liskiti Island, which I am not on today because I'm here in person for a change, which is a rare event, but we will continue on, see how that goes. We have an agenda before us. I understand there's maybe one, well, it doesn't have to be added to the agenda, but there's a motion Director Gisborne put forward that can come up under the financial plan.
Yep.
But it's not really a new item. It's just, it's already built into the process.
Yeah, so no surprises.
Is there anything else anyone would like to add or change? And if not, would someone like to move adoption of the agenda? Director McCormick, Director Gisborne, discussion, all the question, all in favor? Carried unanimously. We have minutes from February the 10th, 2026. Are there any changes, additions? If not, would someone like to move adoption of the minutes? Director Gisborne, seconded by Director Lennox. Discussion, none. All question, all in favor? All carried unanimously. We have no delegations. Business correspondence. We have one item of correspondence, and there's an item already associated with that. So I think we can one, which is Director Lander. Go ahead.
Move the recommendation.
Okay, there's a recommendation, seconded by Director McCormick. Discussion on that. That's to provide a contribution of $50,000 Community School Association. Yes, there's no discussion on that. And I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, item on to reports. Item 8.1, provincial grant funding for local fire and emergency services. First, I'd like to see if our manager of emergency services, so I see he's on the call, if he has any comments he'd like to make on this before we consider a motion. One of his items here, because it's I think that's the, I guess, write a letter because we didn't get funding. Mr. Toms, do you have anything you'd like to add to this item?
I will, Chair, just really quickly, just to summarize that, you know, we'd all seen some cutbacks already in some of the grant dollars available. And then I think most significantly, though, we're seeing the first ever time we were unsuccessful in the grant for our volunteer fire departments training and equipment. And the reason given was just not sufficient funding across the province for all of the applicants. So it is something I think we'd recommend the board consider.
Are there any other questions? Would someone like to make a motion? Oh, seconder for the motion. Discussion on that. Director Gisborne.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm concerned about the lack of pulling back of funding. I'm happy with, you know, sending a letter, sending correspondence. My one kind of concern is, you know, how much advocacy do we want to dedicate to trying to, you know, get those grants back? Because I think we've all seen the provincial government's budget, and, you know, we can, you know, what is it, squeezing blood from a rock or something like that, as they say. I'd like to see the grant funding a little more flexible. Unfortunately, we're kind of seeing the provincial government being a little more tight-fisted. So I'll support the motion, but I don't want us to spend too much staff time on trying to get blood from a stone, I think is the term.
Any other discussion? I'll add myself. I just have a comment. I support the recommendation. I think it's appropriate. I just want to say that we have kind of become dependent on this funding, and the only challenge I find, and I think the problem that the withdrawal or the reduction of this funding by the province via UBCM throws a wrench not into our financial planning works, but into all local governments that have become dependent on this. So it's a little bit, you know, the timing of it is far from desirable. Let's put it. If this was going to happen, it would have been, you know, if the province was going to do this, it would have been better to know way before, at the beginning of our financial plan, because doing this for local governments at this stage is a bit challenging. Maybe they couldn't help it, but I think it's most challenging. So no fault on our behalf, but I think the province kind of dropped the ball here. Director McCormick?
Yeah, thank you. It reminds me of the catch-22 situation of improvement districts where you've got the health authorities who say, you have to upgrade your water up to these standards, that's the rule. But the province that would provide the funding for you to do that won't provide the funding to improvement districts. So there they are. And, you know, it seems like that's becoming infectious, this catch-22 stuff. Not a good thing.
Absolutely, and then when you think of timing for AVICC resolutions and so on, they're off the hook. There's no time to put resolutions for this, so there'll probably be discussions we might discuss. Something will come with UBCM, but it probably gives them a year break before the resolutions start flowing on this. Director Southcott.
Thank you. I was going to make this comment with regard to the next item that pertains to this one as well. I really appreciate the manager of emergency services diligence over many years, and that goes back to when I was an operational beneficiary of what he got us here for this community. It's been huge for a long time. Going back to that time, we also noticed how, as provincially directly provided services were cut back and cut back and cut back, gradually grant funding supplanted that. But now this is in a way, this is a slap to what allowed us to, if you're not going to give us them, you're not going to give us the services, give us the grants. And if that's not going to happen, then what? We squeeze our local people. So I'm highly in favor of writing letters and not let them off the hook. This needs to be stated. It's like, we see what's going on here, and all you have to do is look at slightly longer term, and it's like, anyway, but it's happening across the whole board. So anyway, sorry, thank you.
No need to apologize. I think it helps so our staff here that you know, strongly worded letters may be all we can do, but you know, support's there for us to advocate, or for our staff to advocate on behalf. Go ahead, Director Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. And actually, I appreciate the passion because, you know, what have we heard relentlessly since in my entire term here is wildfires and, you know, ways that we can actually support the community to actually take some action. Again, kudos. I've been getting used to the wins as well, right? We've got a long list in our report of grants and different funds that we've been able to access and be successful doing so. So thanks, continue. I'm sure we'll continue to do that. But it reminds me of sort of back to what we've been working with the Savory OCP about prevention, of course. So a lot of these things, fire smart, I know we've there's been stutters and stars, but a lot of success there. And about teaching our people to be resilient in our communities. So I know that we can do better there as well and kind of use the power of everybody together in our neighborhood. So, you know, hopefully staff, if we're not getting any love from the province, like, you know, let us know as directors how we can engage locally with that and anybody on our fire departments, because I want to do that. And then early detection, it reminded me, we've got groups like the group on Savory that's looking at new technologies and new things that'll let us know about a fire, hopefully well before it becomes a problem. And so again, again, what we can do is help advocate and not get in their way. So I just appreciate the report, and it is disappointing in the grand scheme of all the things that if you do look at what grants are being funded, both federally and provincially, and have maintained significant heavy volumes of funding compared to what's being cut, again, that'll give you some perspective of what the priorities of our current BC government are. Thanks.
Is there any further discussion on the motion, which is as recommended? Question, all those in favor? Unopposed? Okay, item 8.2, which is the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. Director Gisborne, Director Lennox. Is there any discussion on this item? Director Lennox.
Yeah, sorry, maybe for staff, Mr. Toms, I see it's support a grant application, 40,000 exercises for our EOC staff, emergency operations. You know, I guess the question is, if we don't get this grant, does those things proceed? Or are we reduced? What kind of risk, you know, does that put us out, or does it just make life harder for you to get it done?
Mr. Toms?
Yeah, through the chair, that's a very fair question. I think right now we've anticipated that 40,000 in the financial plan. And then have also anticipated the expenditure in the regional emergency budget. So if the revenue doesn't come, we still have the expenditure anticipated, but would certainly generate some discussion. This is, the way these grants work is we apply on them now. It's often a couple of months and before we see any type of response. So really it would be latter this year and the first half of 2027 that would be impacted by the lack of funding for this. So it would certainly generate some questions as to how to proceed.
Thank you for explaining it in that way, because that's kind of what I was getting at is, then the subsequent question is, do we get into reserves or do we have reserves and that type of thing to pay for an important effort like emergency operations? Again, we've heard, what do we hear even the last week at our training is those teams that do, unfortunately have to take action in a regional event, especially, like that's the key with that team and that training. So, thanks.
Did you want to answer to the question if we have reserves?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I got sidetracked.
I don't know if Mr. Toms, if you have that, or if we need Ms. Greenan to answer whether so I guess the question is if it doesn't go through, do we have reserves? Where did that adjustment come from to fill in that revenue hole? If it didn't come
through the chair, and I could defer to Linda, but I would say that this isn't a capital expense, so we wouldn't see our reserves going there.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. No, we don't have reserves for operations. In the regional emergency service, our reserves are only for asset replacement, not for operations.
Thanks for the reminder.
Have to juggle things
somewhere else
here and see where that comes from.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion?
And if I could, Chair, just to highlight, this is challenge, and kind of to paraphrase maybe some of the comments in the last report, is the challenge for us to be really clear is that this is a requirement in the Emergency Disaster Management Act, local authorities to be doing this kind of training, have these kinds of plans in place and exercises. So it's not that we can retreat on doing it. However, the provincial funding that we've committed, and for us, it's allowed us to always have an ongoing contract with extra capacity, and the evacuation planning assistant that many of you have met that does a lot of work around the region with our community, as well as in-house with our staff in EOC training. It relies on that. So the challenge would be, how do we look at that contract? How do we keep that capacity up to meet these actual requirements in the Act?
I'll add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Director Lennox, and I think it's just to pick up on that. This is important work. It's not a project, it's not a simple, we have a grant and then we have a project. If we don't get the grant, we don't do the project. This work needs to be done. And this kind of work is not just required at some level, but it's required from a well-being of our community, safety of our community, because emergencies and need for emergency response is increasing when you look at things happening across the province. And so that's something that regional districts have to shoulder. So we have to do the work, and we have this grant, which is great, but over time you become dependent on it to a point. And then if you don't have it, then you got to figure out, what we do. So we'll hope to get this. I think that's all we can do for now, but I think it's, valid questions that we'll have to look at if and when we don't get a grant. Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, thanks. And Mr. Toms has flagged my memory from another life here, is that due diligence wise and safety wise, our regulators expect our teams to be practicing these things. And we, when we've had inspections and not here at the regional district, but again, other employers I've had, that's where you can receive orders, and that's what's flagged from our regulators, that we need to be practicing. So it's like you said, it's not a nice to have, it needs to be done. Thanks.
Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I just want to say a few things. When we go to these conferences, and regional emergency has been kind of top of mind on everyone's list down there. And one of the big concerns I always have is in the areas where you have a lot of natural environment, lots of forests, areas where, you have risks of wildfire, they tend to be low population, low taxation. And I always think of, you got Metro Vancouver, big taxation, big area, but everything's pretty developed. And then you look at a place like Central Coast, which, they can barely handle their solid waste because they have no municipalities. And, this has been my concern the entire time, is the provincial government is downloading this onto regional districts to do, regional emergency preparedness. And they would always go, oh, well, don't worry, there's all these grants that'll help you do this and do all this work. And as the other loans that we dealt with, well, those grants are drying up. And this is kind of the trap that happens to local governments when new things are being dropped on us. And they say, don't worry, we'll provide funding to help you do it. And then the funding starts to trickle away. And in the end, we're kind of stuck holding the bag. And I think that our region is not as in a top position as some other regions. But it is something that I think we're all going to be very concerned about, because, at the end of the day, it's the provincial government that really has the big tools to help us if there's a big fire or a big earthquake. So I'm happy to support the motion. I guess the province would stop doing this.
Going advocacy through ABICC and UBCM, I think, is one thing. But okay, so we have the motion on the table. Is there any other discussion on that motion to apply for this grant? Seeing no hands up, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That one carries. So we're on to item 8.3, which is the Director McCormick, which is the expansion of the solid waste collection. Yes, we can ask some questions. So that's about whether we want to direct some funding to the waste management budget to expand
for
food
waste collection at the rural.
And Cadet South and Gillies Bay.
That's right. Yes.
So go ahead, Director McCormick.
Thank you. Those of you who've been around this table for a while will remember when in 2021 we had a report from staff about yard waste being dumped at Shelter Point Park. And at the time, staff wanted to put gates up to prevent people from, going down there and doing that. Instead, we've taken a more proactive approach to educate and try to stop the behavior, which by and large has stopped. So we're not seeing it being dumped in the park anymore. But that was the germ of the idea that organics need to be collected on Texada. People need a place to put yard waste. We had a report from staff about this back in February of 2024, and the report says in several locations they recognize while Texada Islanders do an excellent job of composting. I'm getting to the question. I'm getting to the question. But because the report said Texadas do an excellent job of composting, and now we're seeing a report that is recommending food collection on Texada, when we have another report that acknowledges that there's already a lot of food collection on Texada. It anticipated 5 tons plus of material being collected. That's yard waste. That's what we need collected. People compost very thoroughly and very regularly. Virtually everyone does, or someone who does. So you take your compost material. What's changed? That's my question. Why is staff taking such a different about face, I guess, from what we saw before? And what information is new information that has brought that about?
We have our manager of environmental services and our waste diversion supervisor both on the call. So I don't know, Mr. Cohenhoven, whether you would like to start with that, or Ms. Wills wants to address it. But
thank you, through the chair. So we'll go with the question of what's changed and what new information do we have. What we have now is an updated solid waste bylaw with new tipping fees. And in that bylaw, there is a provision for the collection of food waste under 10 kilograms that does not have a tipping fee. So it's not weighed and there is no fee attached to it. That's the program that we do have available at a few of our depots. And when we moved the food collection from the town center depot to the resource recovery center, there was questions about whether that savings could be put towards collecting food waste at other depots. That was the main objective of this report, was to look at what would the cost of the expansion of the food waste be, and would it fit within the savings that we previously realized when we consolidated operations at the RRC. Our new bylaw does not have a provision for free yard waste drop-off. And while that is organics, we have established new fees for that, and it is all by ton. And there is no amount that we could take for free under that bylaw. So the vehicles, the tools that we have available to us right now would be to add the food waste collection in accordance with our bylaw and the free limit. And if we were to want to consider a yard waste collection on Texada, we would need to be looking at a scale and some way to measure and weigh the yard waste, or to be amending the bylaw to allow for some other measurement and fee. So those are the things that we have that's new, and that's the tools that we have that would let us move forward with food waste portion of the organics collection.
Thank you, Director McCormick.
Yeah, thank you. And my follow-up question is looking at a memo, Jason, that you wrote in January of 2025, where you say since 2016, the QRD has provided free compostable food and yard waste organics drop-off to the public. So what we're asking for on Texada basically is no different than what is already available. But the yard waste is what is the important component, not the food waste.
Mr. Cohenhoven, that's, I'm not sure if that's I didn't hear the question, but it's an implied question. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to remind everyone that we did stop the free yard waste collection in 2025. We had that happening at a contracted site. And when we introduced the new bylaw and when we started collection at the RRC, the board all voted in favor of terminating the free yard waste collection.
So we're on questions, so we haven't got a motion on the table. So questions to clarify the proposal for food waste expansion. Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. Lots of good information. I'm taking a look at the options. There's 4 options. At the very bottom, it says defer pending advisory committee review. And I'm just wondering, what is our timeline on the advisory committee eventually getting reformed? If I want to move going that way,
Director Cohenhoven.
how are things going on that front?
Through the chair. So we have had a response from the ministry, and just to remind everyone, our current terms of reference for that committee has been found to be quite limiting, and we do not have enough members on that committee to meet. We've had a response from the Ministry of Environment and Parks that we do need to process a amendment to our solid waste management plan, because the terms of reference for that committee are actually part of our solid waste plan. So we are working on proposing an amendment, and then we must submit it to the ministry, and it'll be on their timeline to approve that, so that we can act and advertise differently for that committee. I do not have an exact timeline, but there are several steps to go.
Thank you. No further questions from myself at this time.
Director, so.
Thank you. I think I heard the answer to this question Mr. Cohenhoven gave to Director McCormick. On page 7 in the summary, second paragraph, it mentions $55,000 savings. Was that the savings that were realized in the reorganizational change back a couple of years ago?
Mr. Cohenhoven.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. That is the savings from moving the organics collection from a contracted site and consolidating those collections at the RRC.
Thank you.
Well, Director Livingston.
Yeah, thanks. I might have more, but good questions. I was looking obviously page 7 at the cost and some of the other things. It's quite obvious that taking this stuff from Texada is a lot more costly if you look at it per ton, which makes sense. And we might want to have a discussion whether Texada is interested or the other two are or aren't, right? But I was wondering how, there's been some assumptions here about collecting approximately 11 tons of food waste per year. I guess consistent with Thloman, and maybe any comments to fill that in about confidence in the numbers, I guess.
I'm sorry,
I know that was a messy question, sorry.
Do you
I
mind?
was wondering, I'm just reading in the summary, it says it assumes that the depot would collect 11 tons of food waste per year, which is what Lawman's depot did. Is that what you're assuming these other, like Lund would do and the other two would do, or are they all similar volume as the assessment?
Yes,
Okay,
through the chair, that is correct. We are
Under
assuming 11 tons. And if I just may add that, again, the collection infrastructure, the actual containers and the transportation is a relatively fixed cost. So we do have some room, we can collect a little bit more or a little bit less and still have that same total annual cost per depot. But we are assuming when we're looking at the cost per ton that we're talking about approximately 11 tons of material because the Clawman Depot is our best estimate right now.
I have a question which is related to minimum scale. So option 1 is the recommendation, which is 3 depots. Option 2 is an extra depot, so Vananda and Gillies Bay plus London. That's how. Is there an option? Would it be feasible to only include the 2 mainland ones, London and that's south, or is there a minimum scale to make it work? And I asked that just because hearing the comments from Director McCormick and looking across, and I'm not saying I want one or the other. It has nothing to do with, none of this has anything to do with Lasqueti. It's really just, is there a minimum scale to even make that work to require all 3 of those, or would it work as an option?
Through the chair, I think you are able to pick and choose in this case. We are currently working with a contractor to only service the Clawman Depot. I believe we would be able to find a contractor that would add 1 more or 2 or the combination that the board chooses.
Thanks. And I just asked that just if it comes up, then the board can consider that. And of course, if there was less, any additional ones could be considered in the future with some numbers. Okay, monitoring over time. Any other questions or round of questions? Are we done with our round of questions? Okay, Director McCormick.
Yes, thank you. My question, Jason, and I really appreciate the information, is if the Gillies Bay location was left off this list and you proceeded with the other locations, but not Texada, would it be possible to get an opportunity for yard waste collection on Texada Island? That's what's really needed, not the compost. So if I was to bring a motion to the board and if it was passed, directing staff to look at a yard waste collection system for Texada, is that something that you could do?
Before I hand it over to Mr. Cohenhoven, maybe I'd clarify there's 3 pieces to this. One is it feasible with the motion? Would a report be needed? Is it feasible in the time frame of this budget? Because this is, our budget right now. And I guess the answer is no. I'll just say it's no. What would be required to explore that? Would it be a report, just to help Director McCormick know?
Yeah, thank you.
If it's feasible at all, and whether that appropriate approach would be to ask for a report on feasibility and cost that might be considered at a future board meeting. So that's my rephrasing is
Thank you.
Mr. Cohen-Hoven.
Through the chair. Yes, I believe a report would be required to look at the implications of this. I would just request a little more direction if there is a motion, whether we are looking at a free drop-off program for yard waste or whether we are looking for a paid drop-off program. As that, it would just change for me whether we're talking about amending our bylaw as well.
We could look at both.
But what I'd suggest, actually, just because we're trying to finish our budget this year, if Director McCormick's interested, maybe at well, today or in a future meeting, a notice of motion to do this.
Make a notice of motion then.
On this, and then before that motion comes, then I would suggest getting those details in that motion so that we know, what, so it's clear to staff what that's looking
Yes.
to, and maybe even talk to Mr. Cohen-Hoven and for our future. I don't know if that would be committee the whole meeting or finance, but
Yeah,
here.
no, that's great. Great advice. Thank you.
Some appropriate. Okay, Director Gisborne, so you're.
Got so distracted with the talk of yard waste, I think I lost it.
You like the question. So yeah, so we're getting a bit off topic. The question should be, I mean, I understand we're talking about these text data, but we want to keep our focus on, what we do.
Because this report isn't about yard waste, it's about food waste.
So if we don't have any other questions, maybe what a motion.
Well,
Other question.
yeah, I think my question to the board is like, I'm hearing that Texada maybe is not interested in being included in a motion. The options that were included in the report don't have an option of just cut that out and run. If those area directors feel like they want to participate. And so I think clarity from those directors would be good before a motion goes on the table and then what the cost would be.
Let's see you and
Democratically, and to leave an audit trail, I would suggest that you make the motion that you believe is appropriate. And then if any director wishes to remove themselves, that they make an amending motion that the rest of the board supports. Otherwise, there's no audit trail, and 5, 10, 15 years hence, and this is maybe a big topic, people will be wondering, how come such and such was left out when they should have been in the first place? And with that, we now have an audit trail to go back on and say, here is what transpired, and now we know.
So put another way, and we don't have a motion yet, so I see another question, but we should get.
I was gonna move a motion, sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so I'll clarify, there's the motion in the agenda on the recommendation. There's the other option of including the 4, and then if there sounds like it would be feasible to put an adaptation of that motion, but we wouldn't know the number. So we'd have to clarify what number to put in there, but that if it was to only be Lund and Cadet South and then drop to the that would be, and of course that discussion on that, if that was the motion, should come from the directors affected, well, anyone, especially the directors. So go ahead, Director.
Thank you. I was gonna move option 4, which is to defer this to the pending advisory committee review.
And I'll second that for discussion.
I'll speak to it.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. As we all recall, we amended our tipping fees bylaw to, actually do cost recovery for yard waste and food waste and garbage. And one of the things that I think we learned in that whole process is, what are the unintended consequences of some of these changes? And one of the things that comes up is induced demand. So when it was free drop off for yard waste, next thing you know, I think it was like 90% lawn clippings showed up, and no one was putting lawn clippings into their household garbage and sending that off to Washington State. And I think there's a much larger conversation around what we do with food waste, and just point out on the list of all these sites, none of the sites are in Area B. There's ones for Area A, C, D, and E, but not in Area B, which I'm fine with because, oh yeah, you're gonna ask. And myself, I'm a farmer, and we deal with our own waste, and it is a little bit more work to kind of deal with my own composting. But if I had a free drop off, I might go, well, maybe it's easier for me to just go and dump it in the bin and have someone else pay for it. And that's kind of how we get into this, mess of creating an induced demand, and then when you turn around and say, okay, we're actually going to start charging for, say, yard waste or these things, people go, what? But it was free, and then it becomes a whole back and forth with the public to explain that, well, it was never free, it was just being subsidized by the taxpayers. And as part of this report, I see when it leaves our depot, the organics is actually costing us $200 a ton, and I think last June, the amount was around $150 a ton. So I'm thinking, maybe we should charge even more for it, but but I'll leave that to the side right now. And I think when we get that solid waste management plan monitoring advisory committee reformed, we're going to have some really interested community members that can both help with the messaging and help with the understanding of when we do these changes, what is the impact of induced demand, and to look at things like yard waste on Texas Island. And you might even then get, some partnerships with, like, say, an agricultural institute or things like that, where we can try and get some more of these waste streams diverted in a less formal manner. Because once it shows up at our facility, we have to take responsibility for that, and it has to go through, a very expensive process. And once members of the public find out about how much that process actually costs, that's where we've actually seen some good public response in relation to our increase in tipping fees. So I think, they're good ideas. This is great that we've got the comp. I think this information would be very handy for that advisory committee and for members of the public who are kind of wondering, like, hey, why don't we just have a free drop off in South or Lund, and we can actually point to this and say, well, it's not free. But maybe if you're really interested, you might want to sit on the upcoming committee, and maybe we can get some quorum over there. Thank you, Chair.
Director Lennox, I don't know that.
Thanks, Chair. Just in support of, it is a delay, right, to go to a committee, but I want to take action on everything. I'd like to move quickly, but I see some value for the reasons under consideration today. With what we're talking about, I think you can tell already for Area A, I think it's a reasonable cost for us to be able to accept that. But I do feel that, nothing is free. And so I haven't had people sort of approach me saying, hey, as the new recycling center in Lund sort of takes shape, and there's been some good work and it's going to be great when it's all done, kind of I'll be able to gauge maybe better. There's an election coming. Maybe people want to hear about it, and through the media or otherwise watching our meetings, and say, yeah, we need this. I'd like to see it in Area A, and I think it is reasonable, but I'll add that I've also been approached just recently over the last year or so, different people in the community, both regional and within city limits, about solid waste and compost and just any number of really smart ideas, some of which may never come to fruition, but we should really be kicking around with the latest current version of our community, and a whole bunch of other reasons. So I think that's a great thing for a committee to look at, this particular food waste, and the impact is by transporting all these distances and the carbon footprint to do that. Again, we're talking about these landfills and other people that are doing this work for us hundreds and thousands of kilometers away. I'm not happy with that, right? So I know I'm going off track, but it all is related. And I think we have people ready in our community to step up to, I think, this committee especially, and get involved. And it is a requirement, as our staff has just stated. We're kind of out of compliance, so I think we could really do better by the rules and by the community, and our new, we will have new leaders, and they'll be able to kind of get their fresh input on solid waste. It's been a while. Thanks for letting me drone on.
That's the argument for the motion, which is to send it to the future advisory committee. So I have a question for Mr. Vollenhoven about the implications of this. If this happens, I mean, obviously, so that would mean no changes to the current draft of the budget today and in a week. So if it went to the committee and the committee digested this and maybe some other things, so that might take some time, of course, because the committee needs to be formed and to be at least something on the agenda. Is it, would it be possible if the committee is like, yeah, let's do this, or let's do this for 1, 2, or 3, or whatever they recommend, and it came back to the board? Is there any ability to do this in the current budget, maybe with contingency or non-statutory reserve or something? Or would is this essentially deferring the possibility of this program for a year?
Through the chair, I had not considered using the reserves for this purpose. So I would actually need to confer with our financial services department as to what would be appropriate. I believe if the board wanted to see this remain as an option for the year, if the committee does get established and we do want to put this on our work plan for 2026, then I would recommend we add some money into the budget that it could be funded through taxation and have those available rather than backing ourselves into the corner and having to wait for the next budget.
I'll leave that in the air. We can either, if there's interest, director can make a motion to that effect now, or when the financial plan item comes up, if the committee so wishes. But that's the implication. So if we, I guess to restate it, if we want to be sure that it's possible, then we would be wise to put some extra money there to allocate it. And if it wasn't used, that would be surplus. If we don't do that, it's not necessarily the case it's impossible, because there may be some contingency there, but it also might very well be possible that we've used up the money, and if it ain't there, it ain't there, and we are effectively not able to do this for a year. Now that may or may not, depends when the committee could get together and all that process. If that happened next month, then we have a 10-month delay. If we don't, probably be less than that. So I'll leave it there. We have our motion on the table, which is to option 4, which is to defer consideration to pending review by the Solid Waste Management Plan Advisory Committee. Director Southcott.
Speaking of the motion.
That's already made.
Yeah.
That's what we have on the table.
Yeah.
Speaking to the motion, I'm sorry. I'm not hearing. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
You're doing a great job.
Really great.
Pardon me?
That is quite the change.
Yeah, it's easier
Virtually.
I can turn up the volume on the speaker.
Oh, that's what he's
You
doing.
need to go to the other room or hear from
And no offense, but go ahead, floor is yours.
I just want to say, I am very possessive of my post, and nobody can upset. If I was to say anything else, it would be basically repetitive, totally repetitive to Director Lennox.
Same with pretty much everyone on the sheet. I noticed, I'll just note that Laskeedy is not involved here at all. It makes no sense to send solid waste, food waste off Laskeedy, since no one would bring it and it would cost a lot. We could make the tax aid amount $10,000 a ton to, so no one's going to do that. So I think it's good the way it is. Director McCormick.
Thank you. Yeah, just excuse me. To say if it was delayed for a year, that would give me a chance to talk to people, and then I could evaluate if needs have changed. Because the loud needs that were expressed to me, and actually as recently as about 2 weeks ago, somebody said, "Are we going to get a yard waste bin, you know, in our recycle depot?" And I said, "Well, it's just in the works." So I don't mind waiting a year. To be honest, I think it'll be a good opportunity to evaluate where the community is at and whether or not this would make sense for data.
Totally fine. And my comments were not meant to say it was a bad thing or judgment. It was really just implication. So a year might be considered by some as a good thing or neutral. It is an implication. We shouldn't go forward, not put money and then say, hey, we should do something that costs money. It's about transparency. But so we don't have to do an amendment, but I think it's just, if we want to be sure to have that option, we should. And if we don't, then we should accept that that's the implication. Director Isaacs.
Maybe a question for the other directors to ponder is the value of waiting a year to be able to talk to constituents, although, you know, we've got elections this fall and people may change. So, you know, as individual directors connecting with constituents versus going to an advisory committee. Advisory committees take staff resources and are, you know, cumbersome. And if it's really about having some time to connect and make sure that you understand what the need actually is among your constituents, maybe the advisory committee isn't necessary and it's more just about deferral generally. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, just to point out, The Solid Waste Management Plan Monitoring Advisory Committee, I know that's a mouthful, is a provincial requirement, solid waste management plan. I don't think it's met since 2023. And one of the challenges is trying to get members of the public to join. And so hopefully we're going to get a more flexible terms of reference. And then, this is one of those things where this might actually attract some people to come and sit on the committee to go, hey, what are we doing with compost? And what are we doing with yard waste? And is there any other solutions to it rather than just throwing money at the problem? And I think that's where we got some really wonderful people in this community, like, Director Southcott, hands off his compost. And I look at a lot of my compost, I'm like, well, that feeds my pigs, and then that feeds me. So hold on. My wife says I can't get any more pigs. But that's where, if this was just to throw something at a committee and then form a committee, I would agree with well, you're not Director Elliott. Your name played Director Isaacson. But this is a committee that we do have to form. And, now that the facility's built, I'm sure some folks are going to go, well, what does the committee actually do? Why should I join? And I think this is a great topic. How do we do solid waste collection and organics in the electoral areas? And I think this might actually be a way to attract some people to sit on that committee and then get it doing some heavy lifting.
Go ahead, Director Lennox.
Thanks. And then, of course, I'm speaking for Area A, which is on this list here. So I'd like to do both, right? In respect to the previous comments, we need the committee. I mentioned why before, so this is one of the things that they can do on long term. But I'm prepared to take action like immediately for Area A, and I thankfully the other directors pointed out, non-stat reserves for waste management is about $1 million right now, so I don't think this is a big, huge commitment long term. But whatever it's needed to make sure that those funds are available doesn't make it more cumbersome if and when we want to do this. That's the objective. So like I say, I'd like to do both.
Okay, so we've discussed this a lot. We've got a motion before us, option 4, which is defer pending advisory committee review. Good with that? Any other discussion on that? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Unanimous. Look at that. We're all outside. That's great. So we're on to item, we have a big one now, 8.4, which is our financial plan, draft 3. And first, we have an updated draft, which includes a lot of detail. And there's 6 recommended motions. For structure, like last time, I will first hand over to ask our manager of financial services, Ms. Greenan, who's on the call, if she has a presentation or other information for us, especially what changed since last draft. Then I will offer the committee a round of questions, not motions. Then we should consider the recommended motions 1 to 4, just 1 to 4. Then any other motions that directors want to bring forward, and there's at least 2 that I'm aware of, and then finalize with motions 5 and 6, which are about wrapping this up, because this is our last finance committee meeting. We need to wrap everything up so that we can ratify recommendations at the board meeting today. So then staff can have time to get everything together for the board meeting next week. So we are at the end of the process. This is our last kick at the can, so to speak. So Ms. Greenan, I'll hand it over to you for the first step. If there's information you want to give to us, or presentation, or whatever you think we need to know.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I do have a short presentation that I would like to provide, and I'll just share my screen right now. Just wanted to check, is everyone able to see my screen with the presentation?
No.
There it is.
Yeah, there we are.
Okay.
Whose car is that?
So I'm pleased to present draft 3 of the 2026 to 2030 financial plan. In this presentation, I will review again the assumptions. I always like to go over the assumptions because it just reminds everyone what assumptions have gone into developing the plan. I will present an overview of the financial plan. I will review the regional animal shelter because it requires a requisition limit increase as that has been reached. I will review the Myrtle Pond Water System project estimate. The project estimate has changed, and I'm asking if the board would consider changing that estimate and then allocating some more community works funds to that project. I will give a summary of the changes from draft 2. The details of the changes for draft 2 are included in your report on the agenda. I will then review the reserve fund concerns that I have in this financial plan. And then finally, I'll wrap up with the estimated cost per $100,000 and the cost per average home. And then finally, open up the floor to questions. So the assumptions that have gone into this plan are that operational costs are, we have specific estimates, or we have a 3 to 5% increase. Return on investments, we're estimating 2%. In some cases, the estimates they might not be accurate because we just have static estimates in there, but the actuals will be based on actual returns. CPI, there's lots of contracts and contributions that are based on 2.1% BC CPI change. So that has been incorporated into this financial plan in this draft. Future borrowing costs are estimated between 5 and 6%, just because we don't know when the borrowing will actually happen. And the payroll allocations in this plan are based on the 2025 time and motion study. The last draft, they were based on the 2024 time and motion study. So now that they're based on the other study, some of the salaries may have shifted. The changes you'll notice aren't drastic though. As an overview, the requisition means $14.2 million, grants of $2.7 million, operating costs of $18.2 million, a capital plan of $5 million, and an overall requisition increase of 2.70%. The Regional Animal Shelter, we have an agreement with the Regional Animal Shelter, and that provides that the contribution be increased by the BC CPI annually. As those increases have happened, the requisition limit has now been reached, and the requisition limit needs to be increased in order to be able to continue providing the contributions, including the CPI increases. So staff recommend that the requisition limit be increased by the maximum 25% allowable without inspector approval, and that will provide at least 5 years or more of contributions before the bylaw will need to be revisited. The Myrtle Pond well replacement is currently estimated at $142,500 in the capital plan, and an additional $30,000 is needed for consulting services. So we're recommending that the funding for that come from Community Works. The funding for the well replacement itself has already been approved to come from Community Works. The changes from draft 2, the changes amount to an increase of $90,115. The bulk of the changes are in the provincial budget. They expanded the PST, and now it applies to professional fees. So the expansion of the PST, we had to add that on to draft 3 of the budget. So that's about $48,000 of the changes. The removal of the CEPF grants from all of the 4 fire services amount to $120,000 increase cumulatively. And then the changes are tempered a bit by we recognized the prior year surpluses in a number of services that don't have reserves. And we did also have to recognize a few prior year deficits, because those have to be recognized in the subsequent year and then taxed. And the changes in this draft are all, and there's also a number of other changes that when staff reviewed the 2025 actuals, we realized that we had to change some budgets because they weren't adequate to cover what the cost might actually be. The reserve fund concerns that we have, the first one is the Myrtle Pond Water Service. As I've mentioned in the previous drafts, the reserves are currently not adequate for asset renewal and replacement, meaning that we would have to find some other funding in order to continue with renewing and replacing those assets. And that could be borrowing or grants. So the asset management plan for the Myrtle Pond Water System recommends $140,000 contribution per year. And our 2026 contribution is $29,044. So it's falling far short of the $140,000 recommendation. And the board did approve hiring a consultant to help us with rate revisions. So the goal in those rate revisions is to find some rates, that will make the system more sustainable, and we will be able to provide higher contributions to reserves annually, or find some other savings, or another way to basically, we'll look at the whole system, we'll look at all of the capital asset plans, and then figure out what our plan is going forward. So that work will happen in 2026. Lund Sewer is the same story. The reserves are currently not adequate for asset renewal and replacement. The asset management plan recommends that we provide $113,000 of a contribution each year, and the 2026 contribution falls far short at $24,116. And again, we also are looking at revising the rates for the Lund Sewer system with a goal to make that system more sustainable. Another reserve fund concern that we have that I want to bring to your attention is the Texada Airport runway resurfacing is scheduled for 2029, or not scheduled, sorry, it's projected to happen in 2029. Management will keep looking at that surface to see, if it actually needs to happen in 2029, but right now that is our best estimate. And the project right now is estimated at $2.3 million. The reserves on the trajectory that we're going with contributions is projected at $300,000 in 2029. So that will mean that we would have to get the bulk of the project from borrowing. So in order to borrow over 30 years, that would mean an requisition increase to $285,000 in 2029, which would be a 205% increase. And we would have to have electoral approval for the borrowing. So directors might want to consider increasing the contribution to reserve, or consider, what is the future of that airport. The other reserve fund concerns I've expressed in draft 1 and 2 is the fire department apparatus and asset replacement and renewal. And what we heard, we just wanted to remind directors, in 2017, we went for the alternate approval process for the Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department fire apparatus, and we received significant public feedback that they were disappointed that the QRD had not saved to replace the fire apparatus. So in response, the board directed staff to change the focus to save for fire asset replacements. And we received positive public feedback to that change in focus. And the fire services reserves are currently not adequate to fund the capital replacement plans that we have in place. And so that means that we will need debt financing or community works on the current trajectory that we're going. We're making really good strides with the fire services, but just want to let you know that we're not at the optimal amount of reserves. So, if you do want to consider budget changes, it might be, rather than cutting reserves, you might want to consider, is there anything else that we can cut in the budget, especially in the future budgets. Maybe there's different ways to reduce the budget rather than just taking it from reserves. And then I'll just finalize with the residential tax rates per 100,000. The financial plan at draft 3 means residential tax rates ranging from $87.55 per $100,000 in the city of Paul River, and that's a decrease of $5.04. And then the highest one is in Area A. It means $332.27 per $100,000, and that's an increase of $9.63 per year. And the reason for the change, the reason that Area A is higher is just because Area A has it's all about the number of services that are captured within the envelope of services, and also one of the big contributors is the fire service in area A because it has a very small catchment area. So there's a small assessment base that contributes to that. And the residential tax rates per average home are, they range between $521.46 within the city of Paul River. That's a decrease of $20.26 per average home for the year. And they go up to $1,780.22 in Area A, and that's an increase of $109.27 per average home per year. And then you'll see the other rates change because of the envelope of services and depending on the assessment base that is funding those requisitions. So that ends my presentation, and I'm opening up the floor to questions.
Thank you, Ms. Greenan. So now we'll move into questions. So not motions yet, hold your motions, just questions to clarify anything in draft 3 and what we're needing to.
Thank you. Ms. Green, looking under assumptions, which is on page 5 of the report, the top one is a 3% inflation factor incorporated into most budgeted costs. And then 4 points later, it says 3% inflation factor applied to the budgets for many costs. Is that 3% and 3%, or is it just 3% that happens to be mentioned twice?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. It's just 3% that happens to be mentioned twice, just using it in a different context.
Okay.
If I could add to that, Director McCormick said the first one is about the current budget, which of course sets our tax rates and everything, and the other is, and that's an estimate that's pretty accurate because we can base it on data, whereas the ones projected forward, we don't know what inflation will be in 2027, 2028. So those are used for those future years, but that's a lot more, I'd put a lot more uncertainty around the 2027 to 2030 budgets.
I have one other question. Okay, when I look at the recommendation number 2 is that any surpluses for 2025 be put into reserves. But when I think about it, that money was given by the taxpayer in 2025 to operate the airport or Myrtle Pond water or whatever. They didn't give it to go into reserves. So I'm thinking that rather than as a carte blanche that we say, surpluses in excess of asset management reserves and stuff go into reserves as well, I think they should be returned to the taxpayer. So my question is that possible?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, that is possible. The only reason we recommend that they go to reserves is that that allows us to stabilize the requisitions over time. If we always count on the surpluses each year, we could end up with a situation where we have a large surplus one year, we put that forward to the next year, and then we have a dip in the requisition. And then when we need to operate the service and, and we actually get through all of the projects, and then we don't have a surplus in the following year, then we would have an increase, so we end up with dips and increases and dips in the requisition. Putting the surplus to reserves allows us to shore up the funding that we can use for future years. And we do have, either way, our current funding, we're still short of asset management, of meeting the needs of the asset management plans. We're trying to put as much reserves away as possible, but those aren't always optimal. So putting the money into the reserves just gives us some flexibility with our budgets that we can use them to offset for bigger projects in the future. And if they're non-statutory reserves, we can use them to stabilize the requisition. All of this will be made more clear with the reserve fund policy that we're developing in 2026. And that in that policy, we will look at things such as, what is the percentage of the surplus in relation to the operating budget, for example. So if it's a certain percentage above what the operating budget was, then we might want to consider not putting that forward to the subsequent year and only putting a certain amount into the reserves. We're always making efforts to increase the reserves where possible.
Thank you, Chair. I'll have another, I'll wait till.
I could add, if Director Lennox allows me, I'll add a little bit more and then maybe clarify a bit the question with Ms. Green. And so the financial plan, the very last page 269, is a table of our surpluses. A key phrase in that motion is not budgeted for use. So it's that the board direct that 2025 surplus is not budgeted for use. So that is the form of the question. So some cases there are motions related and decisions related to use that surplus to either go into reserves. There's only two things we can do with surplus: reserves or back to the taxpayer as a surplus revenue, or surplus revenue and reserves for the next year. There's basically save it or give it back. So maybe if I could ask Ms. Green to clarify a bit on that table to help us identify which of those surpluses, the big ones. I mean, I don't personally think we should spend a lot of time worrying about the small ones, but of the big ones, which ones are planned for use and would hit that clause in that recommended motion, and which ones we're talking about that would be going into reserves according to that recommended motion.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through the chair, I would like to share my screen again, and then we can go through them. I just it'll be a bigger. So if you can see my screen, these are the surpluses that I'm projecting for the end of 2025. So the first one, this one is the surplus is projected at 100 for the Malaspina Fire Protection Service. The surplus is projected at $170,000, and we're planning to use $47,000 of that in 2026. So that means that the balance of $123,000 could go into the reserves. And as a percentage of the budget, that is the $123,000 represents about 10% of the Malaspina Fire Hall's budget. And what this does is the $123,000 would shore up the reserves that we desperately need for the hall replacement and renewal reserve fund. And the next one is the Lasqueti Island Fire Protection. And as you can see, there is no, all of that surplus is being used in 2026. So I'll go through the other ones that have surpluses that aren't planned for use in 2026. So the Sabre Island Fire Protection, they're projecting a surplus of $40,000, and all of that is planned for use none of that is planned for use in 2026. And then the $40,000 would go to the statutory reserve. So it does stay with the service just in the statutory reserve, then it can be used in future years. In the general admin service, we are projecting a large surplus. And so staff have identified that $411,000 of the surplus were from projects that didn't get completed in 2025. So we are bringing forward $511,000 of the surplus for use in 2026 for those projects. And then we're projecting that the $539,054 balance be added to the non-statutory reserve. This way we can have it in the reserve so that if we have to, for asset replacement plans, in the general admin service, we have a lot of pooled equipment that is funded from the reserve. And so this would allow us to have those funds in the reserve and also allow us to use the non-statutory reserve in the future to stabilize the requisitions, because the requisitions, they could fluctuate if we use all of those reserves. And just for a note, the $539,000 that is planned to go into the reserve represents about 11% of the general administration operating budget. In the planning department, there's 112,000 of estimated planned surplus, and $40,000 of that is planned for use in 2026. And that leaves a balance of 72,761 that will go forward to the non-statutory reserve. You may notice in the planning budget that the reserves are actually the way they are right now because we don't actually have a planned contribution to the reserves. They will be in a negative once they use the reserves in 2026 for the ortho photos. So this 72,761 injection would allow the reserves to sustain the ortho photo replacement. The regional parks, there's $160,000 reserve and projected. And so the plan is to use 85,000 of that in 2026, leaving a balance of 74,714, which would go to the non-statutory reserve. And that would again be used in the future to stabilize the requisitions and for asset replacement. And that represents about 6% of their operating budget. And the reserves, the surplus in the cemeteries is quite small at $40,000. And we're planning on using we're proposing using $30,000 of that in the 2026 budget. So it's only 10,000 that's going to that we're planning on putting to the non-statutory reserve. Also regional emergency preparedness, that's a very small reserve or small projected surplus, $23,000. It's about 5% of their overall budget. Waste management, we're projecting a surplus of 490,000, 35,000 of that because we just planned on using 35,000 because we didn't really know what the surplus would be. And so that would mean that $455,000 could go to the non-statutory reserve for asset replacement in the future or to stabilize their requisition. Northside Recreation, there is a large surplus in the Northside Recreation Service, and that was because we had estimated when we started that project, we weren't exactly sure when when the services would switch over, that we would start operations because the budget was in March of 2025. We didn't know when the operations would switch over. And so that is a large surplus. And we're recommending that does go, bulk of that goes to the reserve. And the reason for that is that if we used all of that in 2026, that would mean a dip in the requisition. And then we would have to have a requisition increase when we try to fund the full operations and debt payments in 2027. So this allows us to stabilize the requisition and not have that dip and then the large increase in the subsequent year. The Lund Sewer Service, there's a $50,000 surplus projected, and we're planning on using 40,000 of that in 2026. And that means it's a modest amount, $10,000, about 10% of their operating budget would go to the reserve. Texada Airport, there's about $65,000 projected surplus, 23,000 planned for use in 2026, leaving a balance of $42,000 to go to and I'm proposing that go to the runway non-statutory reserve because we desperately need to try to increase the reserves for the runway. And again, that would allow us not to have a dip in the requisition in 2026 and then have to have a large increase potentially in 2027, when we have our full operations. And there was some flux in the airport in I'd have to ask Mick, the manager of assets and capital planning, to talk about this, but in the Texada Airport, there were some changes in 2025 that affected how much of that funding was spent, because we did have a change in the operator. So I'm expecting that, it would be a good idea to keep those funds in the reserve and not have the dip because we might have a large requisition increase if we do that in 2027. Texada Marine, there's quite a modest reserve or projected surplus of 14,000, and that would go to the non-statutory reserve. Texada Heritage, the Texada Heritage wants the reserve, the surpluses to go to their reserve in case they ever need to find a new location. And then finally, Savory Marine. Savory Marine is always trying to increase their non-statutory reserve. And so we're planning on using or putting all of that surplus into the reserve to help shore it up. And that represents about 16% of their operating budget. As I said, all of these funds stay with the services. They just aren't in the operating budget, but they are in the non-statutory reserves or statutory reserves for use by the service in future years.
Thank you for that, Ms. Green. And that was really, really good. And I, you know, we're not on that motion yet, but I think that was really important because when we get to that motion, this outlines what the implications of that motion is. And if we want to do something else, I think it would get into the details of those. A blanket change may, you know, some of those are not allocated, but they're also, you know, there's some other additional information that says, you know, suggests a desire for reserves or not in different types of reserves. But we'll leave it there. There will be discussion when we get to the item, and I will now hand it over to Director Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. I don't think we will leave it there, unfortunately. Sorry, but I do appreciate the discussion along the same lines as Director McCormick. I'm trying to understand, like, I get you can't plan to the dime because then if you spend too much, you need to dip into some sort of a reserve. I get that. But what is, you know, I'm running these numbers quickly, right? And I appreciate it, you know, another run through. Admin, $1 million surplus, you know, some of it's committed, but 539,000 to non-stat reserve. Waste management, 555,000. Parks, 75,000. Waste management, 455,000, and North Side, 117. Those are significant numbers that can reduce the taxation on my area residents that are suffering under the highest increases in the region, and still save enough for those overruns and planning and asset management. So, I mean, that's just my comment, but, and like, it's hard as I gotta say for me to say, well, this one, I want this percentage. I know we're waiting this, I'm having deja vu because we talked about this last year. I probably asked the same questions. Ms. Green was probably tired of me asking, but but it's just like that, it's hard to explain to people like, oh yeah, well, we're just in case, you know, and for the future, and like Northside, as an example, fire department's done a great job, new engines, new halls, like new, and we have to plan for the future. But on top of it, significant increases, and I'd like to chisel away at those increases, but do it in a like holistic, not try to line item each one and all this one. Like, you see where I'm going, Chair? And I'm not there, and I know we're at the 11th hour, but this list got to me, and I appreciate the detail of it because those are significant numbers. Like, you know, you give 50% and let that go to reserve and put the other 50% to our taxpayers. So
thank you. And what I'll suggest for the committee is that item, that recommended motion number 2. Why don't we? I'll put that all at the end after we've had off the floor motion. Then what I would suggest is, you know, that one still be considered for anything that we don't get into the weeds on, because, you know, a lot of those things, you know, we've heard going through, there's 14 or so different services that are affected here. We may not want to affect all of them, but if there's motions, you know, at a high level, but for specific changes, do those first, and then that will put it into that clause that they're now planned, and then anything not planned will follow that. And this is an aside, I mean, when there's a policy on this in the future, it will become easier because financial staff will be able to say, here's the rationale for it. And of course the board can change, but then it'll be more clear. We don't have that right now. So there is a different approaches used here, but it's still, you know, a little bit less clear and we're understanding it. So if we do that, then we'll have off the floor motions, and then we'll try to lay those down and then deal with this as a follow-up. We're good. So we're still on questions.
Thanks.
Okay. Director Gisborne.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation and all this information. And I'd just like some assistance in trying to understand, you know, some of the different pages. So I've got page 266 of 269, which shows statutory reserve fund summary and non-statutory reserve fund summary. And I'm just gonna pick out waste management because I like picking on waste management. And I see there's a contribution from 2026, which is the budget, $300,000. But yet when I look at the on the last page, which is the one that we were just discussing, and the prior year surplus, it shows waste management 490 prior year surplus with planned use of 35,000 in 2026, and then like a balance contribution of $455,000 to the non-statutory reserve. So I guess that's kind of where I'm a little confused. Is like, are we contributing 300,000 to the non-statutory reserve as it shows on page 226, or sorry, 266? Or are we putting 455,000 into the non-statutory reserve as it shows on page 269?
Through the chair.
So there's a piece, I'll hand it over to Ms. Green in a moment, but the different puzzle pieces are, and this is, you know, where it gets challenging. So on page 116 is the actual waste management budget, and it shows right now, draft 3, $35,000 from prior year surplus, okay? And then you got the reserve, and it says 300, so I'll hand it over to Ms. Green, but it's kind of the link between what's actually in our draft budget already that's going into reserves, what the surplus was, how much of that's already been allocated in draft 3, and how much of it's not finalized yet, and that could be used to increase that. So Ms. Green will be able to clarify us how we stitch these pieces together.
Okay, thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, so what you're seeing on page 266 of the financial plan document is the planned contributions to statutory and non-statutory reserves, and then the planned spending. So if the surpluses are added to the reserve, they would be in addition to these planned contributions.
If I may clarify, just so help more. So our waste management budget shows use of $35,000, and it shows a transfer to reserve of $328,000. So that's 300 plus interest. If we were to put all that surplus into reserves, it would be 328,000 plus 455,000. Is that correct? So we'd be putting in about
yes, that through the chair. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that's
Oh, okay. So let me just speak it out loud so I make sure that if I get it wrong, you can correct me. So as I understand it, on page 266, it's the non-statutory reserves. That's what that's our plan to put into the reserves anyways. And then the page 269 is, hey, here's the surplus. Would we like to also add that to reserves? So therefore, for waste management, I'm saying 300,000 on 266, and then on 269, it would be another like $455,000 to make a nice big chunk addition to the reserves. Okay, and I guess
just to help clarify, Ms. Green, so our plan, like draft 3, the plan for going into reserves is actually shown on page 116. And that shows down, page, so down at the bottom, it says transfer to reserve on statutory is 312,000. It's the transfer, yeah, I said 328, I meant 312. So 312,000 in our budget. So draft 3, and Ms. Green will correct me if I'm wrong, but try to help. Our transfer to reserve in draft 3 is 312,000. We're using 35,000. That budget includes use of 35,000 in surplus from prior year. But the budget, with the tax requisition and so on, includes a transfer to reserve of 312,000. But there still remains, based on page 269, we're using that, but the draft 3 of the budget includes use of $35,000 as part of the revenue with a transfer to reserve of 312. The total surplus is 490. That means there's still 455,000 that's not yet decided, and it could be, if it's put forward, it could either be put into reserves for 2025, which would not go forward, or it would go to revenue for 2025 and it could still go to reserve, or it could be used to reduce taxes. If we put it to reserve, that would increase the 312 plus 455, so it would be 768. But first of all, I'll go to Ms. Green. Did I get that more or less correct?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. That's correct. So yes, so what is planned in the budget right now is what you see on page 266, as Director Fall mentioned, and then the 455,000 would be in addition to this. I also want to mention the other thing with these contributions is that we're always trying to, when we're developing the financial plans, we're also working, trying to finalize year end and then trying to actually determine what those surpluses are. If we knew, if we had the surpluses well in advance, if we could finish up our year end, say at the end of December, and then know what the surpluses are, then we could have an easier job of trying to say, okay, let's use much more of that surplus in the following year. It's just when we're developing the budgets, we're doing both in tandem. And so some of these, the larger ones, they, those are ones that the board could consider reducing.
That's the link between these. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, so then like as a completely hypothetical, and I'm not suggesting this, like say the regional board said, oh, let's not put anything into reserves for solid waste management, and let's not, like, whether it's planned or prior year surplus, and we could say, oh, we're gonna give like $700,000 essentially back to the taxpayers through the services. But of course, I'm not suggesting that we actually do that, but that's kind of, yeah, and that's kind of where my mind is always like, prior year surplus could go to reserves. It could also go to essentially negative taxation. And that now clarifies the discrepancies between these two, because that's where I was getting like, is it one or is it the other? It's both. And that actually really helps my head wrap around this. And one of the reasons why I bring up solid waste management is we had a big discussion last June around tipping fee increases, and a lot of folks are like, hey, if we increase tipping fees, we should then hopefully see a reduce in taxation. So that will be a discussion I think we're going to have later on in this meeting. So I might put forward a motion in relation to that. And I'm not suggesting that we strip our reserves. So let's not get excited.
We'll get to that item when we, so questions. There were questions. Once, calling twice. Okay, so we are, I want to call it time. Yeah, get your chance. This is not, okay, so we're, let's get on to the motions. And, so we have as the first motion to consider that we accept as draft 3 and guiding information the proposed service schedule.
Moved.
There's seconder for that. Discussion on that. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That one is carried unanimously. So we're going to defer the number 2 for the moment. Let's consider the animal shelter. So the animal shelter, he's not a participant in that, so I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but the recommendation, so we're hitting the limits, is to increase the requisition limit for the animal shelter service establishment bylaw by 25%. So increase that to allow the budget to work, and that be elevated to today's board meeting. So what is the will? Moved. Is there a seconder for that? Okay, so a discussion on this item. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, this makes me think a bit about like the rec complex thing. Is just because the requisition limit is increased doesn't mean that we actually increase it. Because when I first read it, my dyslexia was like, what, we're doing a 25% increase to the, it's like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're just talking about increasing the overall requisition limit. And then what we actually do, the contribution is very well articulated in the report, that it's based on the consumer price index. And there's just one little concern that was brought to my attention, I think last month. One of my constituents said, hey, I went to the SPCA and apparently they can't get a vet, so they don't have any animals. And they were like, what am I paying my taxes to these folks for? And I'm like, well, keep an eye on it. Maybe it's just a temporary service disruption, but that's not something I'm going to jump into at this time. I've got enough service reviews already.
So is there other questions? I have actually a question probably for our clerk officer. So this, just maybe you could describe and answer questions about the process here. So this is a proposed change to the service establishment bylaw. Short of going to a referendum or electors, this would be asking the participants at one point to agree to make the amendment. Is that how this works? And I guess the question really is not just the process, but the timing. Is the timing that we would adopt the budget, but then this would roll out over the next month or 2? Is that how this would work?
Yeah, thank you. So I do believe that this would go through, we'll elevate the motion is to elevate this today to the board, and then that the bylaw come next week. And then we won't require approval from the minister on that. So it will be in place right away.
Right, because it's within 25% within 5
Yes,
years
yeah.
or something. Okay, right, so the
And
Local
I-
Government Act allows this.
I could be incorrect, but I believe, we haven't increased this for 7 years. So it's expected that this will take us through, at least 5 years before we have to review it again.
That's great, thanks. It's always good to have it higher than you need so you can accommodate. And we've been here before with other services, so we have to limit, increase the kind of tax ceiling of some kind. Okay, so any other discussion on this? So there's a process. This will come back to us if it passes today, later today. So I'm gonna call the question, and Director Lennox is there. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, over there with a cup of coffee. Carried unanimously. Okay, item number 4 is so moved by Director Gisborne. Is there a seconder, Director Lennox? Discussion on this. This is Myrtle Pond. Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, and I know you've all heard me talk on and on and on about Myrtle Pond and the new well and getting into details. I just wanted to let everyone know that as I'm aware, the drilling folks are there right now drilling. So keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully they hit water. And so the project is underway. You know, I've had a couple of town halls, and one of them was about the well, and the information has been shared, and of course there's a bit of concern about tax increase and tax implications. So having this unforeseen $30,000, I think to turn to the public and say, hey, we need $30,000 is going to create a bunch of gripe. But if it's coming from community works funds, which a big part of the project already is, I think that'll kind of simmer over the kind of challenges that are, there's a lot of stress in that portion of Area B because, they've been under water restrictions since, what, July? So, this is a little bit of salve for that challenge, and fingers crossed, knock on wood, hopefully they hit water, and then we don't have to worry about it this coming summer. So I'm happy to support it. I know we've got other needs for community works funds. There's really only like 83, 84 parcels, but I look to the rest of the assembly for their support for this, and hopefully it's good news at the end of the week.
Director Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. Not a huge amount, happy to support other areas with community works funds. This is the basics, water. I guess maybe my question is for staff. We're all well aware of either water systems we own or potential ones that we may acquire in the future. I'm wondering about why the extra money. Quite honestly, we had some reports that had some good information and we knew where to drill, and I think it's fair if we're gonna tell people we need more money, what exactly it's for and how relevant that is to sort of, we engage engineers frequently here to get their expertise, and it's, a little raises my spidey senses when I see overruns or just extras. So just trying to look ahead.
Your manager of operational services, just to answer the question for us. Devereaux?
Yes, through the chair, if I may. This cost is to fund engineering, electrical and mechanical hookups to meet Vancouver coastal health requirements. So for every time we put in a new source to a community water system, you need a permit from Vancouver Coastal Health. And that is they want to see the whole kebab. They want to see the electrical drawings, the mechanical drawings, all those things. So that's to cover this off.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up. So thanks for that. I didn't think of that. I was thinking more along, as we discussed in the past, engineers can do tabletop exercises to sort of give us some guidance, or, we actually stick things in the ground. This wasn't really focused on, I think we knew where to drill, but this is really the requirements to add a new source. Is that?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, through the chair.
Okay, so we're okay, we all good?
No, thank you. Very
Are
helpful.
we good to vote on this? Okay, so seeing no hands up, I'll call question. All those in favor? None opposed. That one carries.
Thank you, Assembly.
Honestly, we're good on Myrtle Pond. Okay, now the next step before we get to items 2, 5, and 6 will be any motions off the floor, and I'll start with Director Gisborne because he had one.
Yes, I sent it out. I move that the board direct staff to reduce the 2026 Malaspina Fire Protection Local Service Schedule in order to achieve a 3% overall requisition increase for the service in 2026, and that any unused surplus in the 2025 Malaspina Fire Protection Local Service be added to the Malaspina Fire Protection Local Service Fire Hall Statutory Reserve.
So seconded by Director Lennox, corporate officer is getting the wording, just trying to get to that page there. So discussion, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'll be relatively quick, and I want to thank some of the input from the other directors that kind of made me take a deeper look at the MPFD finances. And of course, now that we've had some more clarification between page 266 and 269, what was it last year? Our prior year surplus was about $123,000, which is good. We're also contributing about $330,000 already into the reserves. I believe it's $200,000 for reserve number 1, $110,000 for reserve number 2, and then $20,000 for the non-statutory reserve. I know there is an upcoming fire hall replacement, which I believe will be closer out towards Black Point or a little bit further southeast. And, you know, a couple $1 million doesn't really even go that far. However, that being said, community works funds are now eligible for fire halls and fire equipment. And as we've kind of gone through looking at community works funds, one of the things that popped up is that historically Area C hasn't really gotten anything. And a new fire hall in Area C, I think, would fit the budget, but of course we still got to wait for that committee to be formed. And, you know, I think 3% is kind of in alignment with, you know, the challenges being faced in the community. And unless I hear a bunch of directors saying, hey, no community works funds for that fire hall, and I know we got to wait for that committee to form. But, you know, we've had a number of increases over the year. It's not like this is there's been small increases and, you know, it's a big increase. We've had a number of big increases, and this is kind of smooth that curve. And hopefully this year is also a relatively low expense as last year was. So that was my thoughts. Thank you.
And if I might, just to see Director, maybe just to ask Ms. Green and just to clarify what exactly this would mean to make sure. And I believe that the wording was sent ahead. So, you know, so my understanding is the reserve that's not yet allocated 123. If the requisition was to increase by 5% from last year, that would be going from 1,069,000 to 1,122,000. About right now in draft 3, it's about 88,000 higher than that. So what this is effectively equivalent to saying is use 88 or 89,000 of that 123 surplus, unallocated surplus, and the balance of that, which would be about 35,000 to fire hall. So Ms. Green, to clarify, that's my layperson's way of putting it. We'll get the actual dates now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I didn't actually do the calculation of how much it would be, but it would be basically using the bulk of that, of the balance of the reserve, the balance of the surplus, sorry, for 2026 operations. So reducing the amount that is going to the non-statutory reserve, but any balance that is available, you know, any surplus that still is left, that would go to the reserve. So it would reduce the amount that is going to the reserve. We would reduce the surplus going to the reserve.
We're still putting in the like 100 and
yeah, there's still the amounts in the plan of
yes.
The budget. It has for the non-statutory reserve 24,000, for reserve statutory reserve S, the first one S1 206,412, and statutory reserve number 2 116,620. So this would still go up a little bit more, but the bulk of it would be used to offset taxes rather than.
This is okay.
Director Brecker.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Question. So my answer, thank you.
Sorry, I should have let you ask.
No, better job than I would have.
I was just trying to make sure we all know what this is. So any further debate on what this is? It sounds like, I mean, see, what I believe is there's enough surplus to cover this without causing problems. There would still be a little bit left over. That will come up when we get the numbers next week. It'll be 30 something thousand, maybe about 88 plus or minus. It'll be about that. That's going to limit tax increases, and that'll filter through the system. We're good on that?
Yep.
Any other debate? None. I will then call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That is carried unanimously. The second one, I'll put something forward for EFD. Yeah, I mean, if it helps. It doesn't matter. You can take it out. Okay, so as we know, so I got a motion, which is that the Finance Committee recommend to the board that the board direct staff to revise the transfer to the statutory reserves for the Skeety Volunteer Fire Service to 50,367, balanced by a reduction in the tax requisition. Seconder, I will explain. Thank you, Director Gisborne. So two things have happened. Well, three things have happened. I held two town halls last week, a virtual one and an in-person one, about 45 people maybe in total. We had a lot of discussion. And under draft 2, it showed overall the Skeety tax is going up by 8% compared to the regional whole. Now the regional whole is around 2.7. And because of this, well, at the time, the feedback I got, which was very clear, people weren't happy with 8%. They're very happy with everything else in the regional district. They're happy with the whole thing. They're not like the 2%, the 8%, I should say. So I said, well, we can work through with the, we have this surplus and reserves, and we can balance that and bring it down a bit. And that's, a lot of causes I've talked a lot about in the last couple of meetings. So I won't go into that too much, but that's just beyond what people can deal with. It's we're in hard economic times. People are, for some people, it's just a pain. For some people, it's actually really cuts in. So, and then since that, based on that discussion though, two things have happened. One is this loss of $30,000 for the grant that we talked about, which is out of our control. And I think the problem with the province doing this at this late time, but also our actuals, when we talked about it last time and when I raised this last time, our actuals we thought would be between, less than 134, but down to 114. Well, they're really 105. So they're around 10,000 less. Now that's my fault. Let's say I'm not applying any fault for that. The actuals are the actuals, but I was overly optimistic, and I had actually made a motion, for those who are recalling what I do, to increase the reserves transfer from 65 to 85. Well, that was overly optimistic because of these two things. So, I've really thought through this, and I heard back from the taxpayer, and really we need to kind of balance this. The fire department and our emergency service staff have done everything they can to produce good budgets. And I do not question any of their operational expenses. I showed I really appreciate all the detail, and I like to look at those and see the due diligence, but I'm not going to get into, line items and try to second guess our staff or our fire chief to say, you should spend less on vehicle maintenance or insurance. I mean, where's that? But this is this balance between short-term taxes and longer-term savings. And we know if we reduce taxes now, that might mean longer-term borrowing. We know that's the trade-off. We tax now or we save later, and later when we want capital, if we don't have the reserves that we taxed for, then that means borrowing or delays. So I accept that $50,000 may be on the low side for sure. On the other hand, if I put that in context, $50,000 for the Skeety taxpayers is about equivalent to saving $1 million in a regional service like waste management. That's like putting $1 million into the reserve from the taxpayer's point of view. And yet the squeeze is for a fire department service, that's not that much. So for LIVFD's need, 50,000 is less. We've heard that consistently from our staff, and yet it's too much yet not enough, let's say. So there's no right answer here. I think the real issue is we need to have tax increases gradually go up over time. 10% shock is too much. This would bring it down to closer to 5%, and then I would plan to communicate to the public there's a need to save. 50,000 is still not nothing. It's still not nothing. It's still a fair amount. It's not quite what we had hoped originally, which was 65. It's still a fair chunk. And then the Skeety taxpayer can be getting used to this idea. We need to save this more than that, increase that over time. And in years when we don't have these shock items at the last minute, we can get people used to that. So I'll leave it there because I think I don't want to go on too much about it, but that's basically the essence of this, is finding a balance. The Skeety will still be higher. Explained to the Skeety taxpayers, like we talked about before, that our assessed values went up so much faster than everyone else. That accounts for about 0.5% on our tax increase. Not a lot, but it's unavoidable. So we got 2.7, we got 3 point something is just going rate. This will bring it up to 5. You just have to find that balance. The fire department budget would still go up, but instead of going up by 20% or something, it would go up by 8%. It would be still higher, and it still represents around I think it's 8% of the whole tax requisition is still saving to reserve. So 300 something out of the 300, close to 300 to 3 something thousand tax requisition, we're still saving 50,000 of that. So it's not trivial. So all that I'll leave it there. I think it's a good balance. I don't know if there's a right answer, but we're just trying to find this balance between not causing harm to future generations and not causing harm to the existing generation. I think it's an okay balance. The discussion will continue undoubtedly. I'll leave it there and see if anyone else wants to talk about LIVFD. Seeing no one wanting to take the bait, I will all those in favor? Okay, thank you. Okay, so appreciate that, Director Lennox.
Thanks, Chair. Along the same lines, we've had a good discussion. There's some general accounts here that I'd like to have directors think about taking effect on, but the one that I'm looking at is Northside Community Recreation. Make an amendment to move $100,000 from that non-stat reserve back into for our taxpayers, and the remaining 17 into this non-stat reserve. So instead of the plan 15, it'll be 32, I guess.
So good. Let's see if our corporate.
I know it's on the fly. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we're talking about the Northside Recreation and the unallocated 107.
Yes.
So the motion is
At page 269.
yes. So
or 266. It's either or. You can see the 15 plan, but yes, 269 is the
269. So I think let me try to paraphrase what
you
said. The motion would be to direct direct 100,000 to 17,000 to the non-statutory reserve and 100,000 the prior year surplus to tax reduction, tax mitigation.
Yes, thank you for paraphrasing properly, and corporate officer, if you need any time. I appreciate it on the fly.
Yes, it's there. It's getting
You just want to.
Give you a
we
second.
know what you want. We just need to.
I can speak to it.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and
yeah, thanks, directors. It is the same intent, and as I've asked, you've seen some emails like, how many dollars does it take to affect a 1% change in Area A? Well, this is a significant change. This was also approved through, it was a pretty close vote for the people that are affected by taking on the debt for the center. So I think it'll be appreciated that we've had a surplus. We're returning it to them. They are paying the debt and associated. We're going to increase some costs going forward, but it gives us a little bit of relief.
Thank you for that, and I'll just make sure our corporate officers get with it. Trying to just right. So and we already have right now, just to be clear, contribution of 15. Maybe I'll make sure I'll clarify with Ms. Green. And so right now the contribution is 15,000. Yes. This would increase it to 32,000.
Yes.
Instead of that 100,000 would be used to use tax or mitigate tax increases. Right. But consistent, Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, so currently we are planning to use 23,000 in the plan for use in 2026. So we would increase that to 123,000. And then $17,000 would go to the non-statutory reserve. Is that what, did I understand that right?
That's correct. And I misspoke. It's actually right now the contribution is 15,000 plus 5,000 in interest. So it's just over 30, plus 17, so it'd be 37.
I didn't factor in the interest. Thank you.
And the interest may change in a way. So
yes, of course.
Okay, so we're any other discussion on the Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I'm not super versed in Northside Recreation as much as I probably should be, but it's not my area. So I know there's a major capital project that's going on up there. I believe it was started in 2023. There's debt financing going on. Has the Municipal Finance Authority issued that debt? Like as in, are we in the process of now having to pay it back? Because the only reason I ask is if the debt hasn't been issued, then the more we pay it on the front end, then it we don't have to pay as much in interest. So I'm just curious about how is the debt with that?
Ms. Greening can clarify, but on page 267 is the Northside Recreation debt financing, but Ms. Greening can sort of better than I can.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, so currently the debt is still short-term debt. And so we haven't gone forward with a what do you call it? A long-term borrowing bylaw. And so when we go forward with the long-term borrowing bylaw, then we can also look at borrowing terms. So right now it can be repaid, we can repay chunks of it.
Okay, so and the reason why I bring that up is I think that maybe something to consider is, the more money we have sitting in the reserve right now, when it comes time to take on a 10 or 15 or 20-year loan, if we're able to have a smaller principal, then the interest will be less likely to kind of eat your kid's future. So I know it's not my area, it's just something I wanted to bring up. Maybe we can think about that, but I'm gonna leave it up to area A and go whichever way area A goes. But that is something to consider, because I'm just thinking about what happened with the Resource Recovery Center was, we want to have a short term to minimize the pain, but at the same time, if you have reserves, then you can reduce the amount of pain because you reduce the amount of debt. That's thought.
All options, and if Director Lennox wants to revise anything, he's free to do, but we'll continue with any discussion on the motion, which is as presented. And this should, can be reviewed, but if from future budgets, the amount in reserves will be a bit over 100,000. We'll have to, so that'll still be there, but not as much as it could be if that was there. So any other discussion on this item? And we have the wording. Does anyone want to see the wording? Are we good with it? Okay, never mind. I won't put our.
Sorry, you guys.
Or are we good with voting on this? We get the essence of it. It's 100,000 to mitigate taxes, and the remaining 17,000 that would go into the reserve. Okay. Call the question on that. All those in favor? Northside Recreation. Any other amendments anyone would like to make before we do anything else with this? Is born?
Yeah, looks like I just had it.
We take a 2-minute bio.
Good idea.
Oh, yes, why don't we take well, we'd never have a 2-minute bio break.
That's right.
That doesn't exist.
Let's be honest.
Yes, why don't we return at 3?
Perfect.
Be realistic about
I second that motion.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, everyone. We're back in session for our last few resolutions for finance, and there's an opportunity for anyone else to bring forward proposed changes to the budget. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the capital plan, page 243, a whole bunch of items. The one that jumps out at me is, I see the flagpole. I know I've been on about the flagpole in the past. Has that project been started, like the contracts award, or is that something planned for 2026?
I don't know, Mr. Devereaux, if that's in his wheelhouse. There he is. Flagpole. Do we have an update on the flagpole?
The flagpole, it's still on the plan. We don't have any kind of real plan right now. Options that have been explored so far have been too expensive, and we're still working on finding something that works within the budget.
Thank you.
Could I move a motion to just scrap the flagpole, or is that out of order?
It's not. Officer, I think it's not out of order.
I mean, it's something that we're considering for 2026.
There's been some work put into it, but I don't see it.
Yeah.
Out of order,
I mean, sorry. Here, if I could just have a second.
Yes.
We made a decision on it, but we have had new information that has indicated that the budget we have is not sufficient. So it would be appropriate to, and it would not be out of order to entertain a motion about the flagpole.
Okay, so it's not out of order to entertain a motion about.
I'll move that we scrap the flagpole.
We're going to use different language.
Just see if we have a second. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sitting too close to Director Lennox.
A seconder for that. Do you want to entertain this? No. Try it. Do we want to try another motion? Is there any other motions that we want to consider? I don't see.
Did we move the flagpole to 2027?
Well, I mean, I think it ought to. I mean,
the capital plan is on 2026's roster. Just clears up the staff's workflow.
Make the motion. We'll see if there's a seconder.
I'll move that we move the flagpole to a decision for 2027's capital plan.
Seconder for that motion. Yes, I think the flagpole is. Whether it happens in 2026 or 2027.
Oh, it's not that flagpole.
Sticking to the flagpole. Carry on with the flagpole, Mr. Devereaux. Although if we need more money, we'll have to figure that out. We'll have information coming back to us if we.
As long as it's under budget.
Okay, is there any other motions? We have 3 recommended motions we have to consider, but if there's, we should get the other ones out. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I have a question before I move some motions. Oh, good sandwich. Capital plan, Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department. I'm taking a look and I see Malaspina Hall number 1, new septic system, $40,000, heat pump, $22,000, and 5,000 gallon water tank at hall number 1. And I guess my question is, in the future, we're going to need a new fire hall for fire hall number 1. And like, do we need to spend that money on fixing up fire hall number 1, or is it better to kind of, keep that money in the reserve and then use that for when we build the new hall? It's, I guess that's kind of my concern is like, we put a bunch of money into hall number 1 and then, in half a decade, we replace it. And, the tank is easy enough to move, but a heat pump is not as easy. And a septic system is almost impossible to move.
So why don't we hand this over to Mr. Toms and he can explain the rationale behind doing this, even future potential hall building. Toms?
Yeah, through the chair. If we take the 3 of those, because we were asking the same questions, we do see it on the capital plan, even though there's not necessarily any imminent new fire hall move confirmed. But the septic, we did some repairs to it last year. That's a bit of an upset number in the capital plan, but like it or not, we do need to make sure we have a functioning septic. And you're right about the water tank. That's something that really the fire chief was looking forward to enable fire training, fire practice, as well as some operational matters. It would pick up and move if the fire hall was ever moved, so it wouldn't be lost. The other one came out of the Health and Safety Committee, and respective of the concerns around just our volunteers who are spending a fair amount of time in the building. Both there was two regarding good heating and cooling, as well as modernizing some windows. The windows were much smaller costs, but that is that cost that we've recommended bringing forward, knowing that, again, it could still be several years before there's ever any upgrade or new fire hall, and wanting to respect the Health and Safety Committee's request to bring better heating and cooling to the building.
And I guess as a follow-up question, usually there's some federal or provincial grants for heat pumps, but that's usually for private dwellings. Would we potentially be eligible for such grants for heat pumps, or is the province cutting that funding too?
Through the chair, I know that we've had that discussion. To be honest, I can't recall what we learned, and I could get back to you on that. That's something that we would explore prior to going forward. But at the moment, we still didn't have a budget yet, so it's just a touch premature to look for other options to minimize the cost.
Okay, thank you. With all that wonderful information, I was thinking about some motions, but I'm actually going to keep my powder dry, because it seems like the staff are weighing the pros and cons and looking at the long-term situation with the fire hall. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else want to? Okay, I'm not gonna ask twice. You had your chance. So now we got three more. Well, I guess I can't stop someone from making a motion anytime they want. There are limits to be there. So, but we do have three recommended motions before we finalize this for committee. First one is recommended motion number 2, which is that Finance Committee recommend the board direct any 2025 surpluses not budgeted for use in the 2026 budget to be added to the most appropriate reserve fund. So according to that table on page 69. So and that recommendation be elevated to the meeting later today. Anyone want to make that motion or an alternative motion? The representative moving. Is there a seconder for it? Dr. Southcott. Okay, discussion on that. Director Brander.
I think individuals who are concerned about particular reserves or surpluses have already addressed that in conversations earlier today, so seems reasonable.
Thank you. I'll add to that. I think I think talking about surpluses is important, because it's all the balance between reserves, future taxation, contingencies, all kinds of things, but we don't have this policy, and I think we're forming the need for it, staff and board. And I think we'll have a policy, and that'll provide more structured guidance of how we deal with this issue and help us understand better that. I really appreciated the table. It really helped clarify going through that. And I think really this is appropriate for the time we're at. And in the future, maybe some things will change in terms of what happens with the different services. Director, and then Director Lennox.
I think he might have had his finger up first.
Okay, who went first? Okay, go ahead, Director.
Yeah, just quickly, again, this is a sense of urgency for me. Like, we're saying we planned on spending over $1 million more, $1 million more than we actually did, but then we're just going to put it into, like, to me, to do that every year after year after year is really not, I don't know, it's not how I plan my budget. And again, when we actually do end up with surpluses, I resisted the urge to go through 2 or 3 of these big ones and start this percent, that percent, right? Like, I don't want to do that. So this policy is important to me. Because I want, there's a balance. Every damn decision we make is a balance, and we got to get back to some balance on this ones, because these are big numbers that impact people dearly. Thanks.
Director, get one.
Yeah, I think our little bio break kind of reset part of my brain. I'm fine with the motion with the exception of one of the services, and that is the solid waste management. So would it be, I guess in order to propose an amendment, for this with the exception of solid waste management, or does it make sense to then put forward a different motion specifically for solid waste management surplus.
So it'd be better to table this one and then deal with that, or it'd be better to do the
I think,
exception?
sorry,
We didn't
I
seize
think
our
it would be
opportunity.
better to table and then bring it back right
I
away.
think it'd be better to table.
Sorry.
But
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll
this
move.
is our last chance.
Yeah.
we don't wanna
Very-
weeds at the board meeting later today, is there? Okay, so is it a motion to table?
A motion to table.
On the table until after we deal with, okay, next discussion on tabling this motion.
We'll circle right back.
We'll come back soon, so I'll call the question on tabling this motion.
Till when?
Till after, to like 10 minutes from now. Until after we deal with any, okay, tabling the motion until after we deal with any subsequent surplus changes regarding surplus.
Yeah.
That helps, so it could be this waste management, could be anything else, we'll confirm surplus, and then when we're sure we're done with surpluses, we'll come back.
Yeah.
Okay, so on tabling, are we good? I'll call the question. All those in favor? It says tabled, just for the moment. Director Gisborne, what would you like to?
I'd like to move that the prior year surplus for the solid waste management service go back to the taxpayers or reverse taxation or whatever the term is.
Okay, so
If a seconder, I'll explain and.
I'll second that.
seconder, and so we're talking about, let's just get the be clear. So it's 455,000. Is that to reduce the tax requisition by 455,000? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 400 and, yeah, that's the.
The corporate officer has.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Again.
All that matters, that's all that matters,
It
is
is.
making sure it's written down, because once we're done, what we say is, it'll be recorded in stone. Okay, go ahead, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, the reason I put this forward is, in our 266, our planned contribution to solid waste management is 300,000. So this motion doesn't affect the planned 300,000 contribution to the solid waste management service. We have a fairly large amount of prior year surplus, and I think we hadn't really anticipated that at last year's budget, because I believe it was June that we did those changes to the tipping fees. And, there was a lot of public pushback in relation to, jacking up the tipping fees. And one of the ways that we were able to sell it was, hey, we'll take the money from either your front pocket, your tipping fees, or your back pocket through property taxes. And I think if we take a big chunk of prior year surplus, 455,000, and put it into reserves, that might kind of undermine the buy-in that we've been so successful within our community. And I think we can revisit this again at next year's budget time. But I think by doing $455,000 of the prior year surplus and putting it back to taxation, when people look at this year's taxes, they go, oh, look, solid waste management dropped quite a bit. That was a result of the increased tipping fees. And it kind of helps the community have that buy-in with this change. And I just want to point out that, in discussions and taking a look at some other regional districts, apparently we have like the highest tipping fees of solid waste management in the entire ABICC area. And now other regional districts are going like, hey, cut that, you guys are the leaders in this. Like, they're actually looking at doing, a pay-as-you-go kind of model for solid waste management. And I just, hate to see the public, turn hostile on it for, don't give them an excuse. It's kind of, let's give that money back and say, hey, this was the actual impact of increasing those tipping fees as we were able to actually do a reduction in taxation. We're still putting $300,000 into the reserves. And I think this is going to actually help get everyone to support this very huge change that we did. I didn't realize that it was actually, that was being a leader in solid waste management. And folks are going like, wow, great job. And I'm like, I just thought it was a good thing that we did. So that's one of the reasons why I put forward this motion, and I hope folks support it. And then when the folks see, oh, why was there a reduction in my property taxes for solid waste, we can say, well, the tipping fees went up, and that's why. Thank you, Chair.
Any other discussion on this motion? Director Isaacson.
It's actually a question for Manager Green. You went through the chair, you went through the list of all the surpluses and their uses and the rationale. Previously, it was a lot of information. Can you repeat the information that you shared for this line item in terms of use and the rationale of putting it into reserves?
Yeah, I'll try first and then I'll hand it to Ms. Green. And so the table on page 269 shows waste management. We have a surplus of 490,000. And 35 has already been allocated.
Yeah.
Identified, so we got 455,000 that's not divided yet. On the budget itself, we have, and well, if you look at the reserve summary, which is page 266, waste management non-statutory reserve shows that we have a balance of 905,000 and a planned contribution of 300,000 in the budget right now.
Yeah.
That's not counting as 455 plus 12,000 interest, so that would increase it by 312, but then a capital spending of 173, so that would decrease it by that. That would leave us to 1444. So if we pass this motion, that would be what we have.
Yeah.
And we would instead that 455,000 would go to reduce taxes. If we didn't do that, then instead we would be putting that 455,000 into reserve, and then that would go up by. So Ms. Greening can correct anything I got wrong there, as usual. I don't always get it right, but I try to simplify.
Thank you, Chair. And no, the Chair explained it correctly.
But,
But I think some of the rationale, in general was about, trying to, in the future, balance any major swings in requisitions that were needed, and so, I needed a reminder about how that is true in this case, and what the risks are about, not, forwarding this sort of surplus to reserves.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. In this case, the reserves for the Waste Management Service are, we do have pretty healthy reserves, and the reserves could be used, in the future to. That's why we don't want to rely on prior year surpluses. But in this case, the reserves in the Waste Management Service are pretty healthy. So I don't think in this case there's a risk with not putting this surplus forward to reserves.
and I'll add just. Director Lennox, I'm not sure if our CEO, have a comment?
No, through the chair.
Okay, and if you look at page 116 of 269, the requisition in 2025 was 3.3 million. It's actually gone on. This will bring it down even further. But that said, if you look back over the past years, I think you'd find that it's up because of getting the RRC finished. So
yeah,
bring it down, and then then any future tax increases would be in that context. So you're right that it would cause, it would look like bigger increases because of percentages if we need to increase those reserves, but we have those reserves from. So Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Appreciate Director Gisborne taking the lead there. That's what I was getting at before, trying to be a little more patient, but I think this is one that we can, as we've just described, has some a healthy reserve. It's never enough. So for this one, I'm very comfortable, but it does reinforce. I was actually going to take the same approach around our $539,000 admin surplus, but guess what? If you look at it, the close is $146. So back to the point, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, to the concept that we just had, that might not be the right figure, but we still need a buffer for any overruns next year, which is why it might not be such good.
Right, so Ms. Greenan has a point, but I think if you look, there's two reserves for general admin.
Yes.
The statutory has got 143, but the non-statutory is 420. So Ms. Greenan maybe has some other.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are two reserves. So the non-statutory reserve for the General Administration Service, it's not as healthy. It only has $232,000 at the close of 2026. So that one could use at least some of the reserve of the surplus. Maybe it doesn't need all of it, but I would recommend putting at least maybe half of it towards the reserve.
He said we got capital spending, but let's keep it on. Something on admin.
That's admin, right?
Yeah, we're on. Let's stay on one track at a time. So we have our motion right now. Is there further discussion on using the 455 unallocated surplus for waste management to mitigate taxes? Hands up, so I'm going to call the question. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Are there any other motions related to reserves? This is just about surplus because that's what we tabled.
Chance, Jason.
Now we're going to pull
from the table.
Pull from the tables. So no, I don't see any other hands up. So we're good.
I'm going to pull from the table.
We need to for that. Or do I just pull?
I think our procedure bylaw is prescriptive, but
I'm just trying to make it easy.
Let's make it easy, bye.
Second motions. Okay, let's call the question on pulling the recommended motion number 2 about surpluses back on the table. Call the question, all those in favor, back on the table where it was at that point. So now that clause of, not budgeted for use in the budget, the 2026 budget includes the change made to the waste management. We're back onto that item. Is there any further discussion on that motion that the finance committee direct the board recommended the board direct that any 2025 surplus not budgeted for use in 2026 budget be added to the most appropriate reserve fund for the respective service schedule, and that's as described on page 269.
Yeah, I guess I'm still not satisfied, with this as an overarching sort of policy. And I know we're getting policy regarding this, and that will be welcome. But I can't support it because I don't think as a principle that's what we should be doing. Taxpayers spent that money in 2025 to operate services. Now that money wasn't needed to operate those services, so it gets just plunked into reserve. They didn't vote, they didn't support putting in reserve. They supported that money going towards services. So I guess I still feel that this is not a good direction, and as a general principle, so I can't support it.
Yeah, just a question that kind of comes into my mind, Director McCormick's comment. Once there is a policy, we'll have clear delineation on what should be in those reserves, will we not? And then a decision can be made very clearly on, based on that policy. I absolutely have the same concerns because I absolutely feel the pain of particularly city residents who are whacked with taxes that are kind of a whole lot bigger than we're talking about here today. So, but these do have an influence. So I have that concern, but I also don't really feel confident to not support the resolution without the policy. Actually, that may be kind of a safe way of going. I don't know. I can't resolve that right now. Thank you.
Director Gisborne.
Yeah. I don't actually support going with a policy approach to how we deal with prior year surpluses, and I'll explain my rationale for it. When I look at all the different services that we have, and I believe page 18 and 19 of 269, and it breaks it down into cemeteries, regional parks, heritage conservation. There's some services that you look at, like fire departments, and you're like, we need reserves because fire trucks are bloody expensive. And then there's some other services where it's like planning, and it's like, well, you don't really need a huge amount of reserves for like each service is a bit different. So that's why I don't like the concept of a blanket policy. And I'm thinking back to one of the things I got on about in, I think it was 2019, and it had to do with the fire department. And I was like, hey, let's increase the fire department's requisition by 25%. And then let's do rate of inflation year after year. And then that gives the signal of like, hey, any money you save just goes right back into the reserve. So that kind of encourages the volunteer firefighters, to turn the heat down when they leave or things like that. And it stabilizes the tax requisition over time. And I think that's what our finance department is trying to do, is to trying to, rather than seeing your taxes up, down, and, all over the place, it's like, well, you kind of got a steady increase, and there's a healthy contribution to reserves. And that's where in some years past, we went, okay, let's take our prior year's surplus and give it back, but let's put a consistent amount to the reserves every year. And then, well, that gets us back into jumping up and down all over the place. So I'm happy to do one-offs, like to go through the services and say, hey, I'm happy with this service using prior year surplus to go back in. But then there's other ones, just like the solid waste management service, where we get a big prior year surplus. And it's like, well, there's a detail about why that is. And it's because we adjusted tipping fees. And then it becomes a whole political discussion and how that works with the public. So some of the major prior year surpluses in this list have already been dealt with. Like we've kind of given specific direction. And I think the motion of, hey, anything that we haven't given specific direction to, like any service we haven't said, no, we want this one to go back to taxation, or we want to increase greater on the requisition. I think, okay, if we're not going to give direction, then, you know, what do we do with it? Do we say all of them you give it back to the taxpayers, or do we say all the remaining ones you put it into prior year surplus? And I'm fine with saying, okay, we'll put the remaining ones into prior year surplus because, you know, they haven't really risen to the top to be pulled out and changed like MVFD and solid waste service. So if there's any other services that, you know, we're unhappy with the prior year surplus going into reserves, I'm not going to say we should table this motion again, but but like that's the process that I believe should have happened. And I think the default is, yeah, throw it back into the reserves, but at the same time, the board should retain that ability at the time of the budget to look at, okay, what was the actual prior year surplus, and then give clear direction to our staff as to what we want to do with it. But when it comes to something like a fire department, I like that 3%, you know, or CPI is 4, then go 4. That's just my thoughts, and that's why I'm comfortable with this motion, because the ones that really stood out to me, I think we've given direction to our staff on how to deal with those issues, and this just deals with the remaining ones. So let's.
Thank you, Chair. So this motion is specific to the intention for this year, not a vote on the future possible policy. And so whether people will support or not a hypothetical future policy, I think that can be left for when that comes before the board. In terms of this motion, I feel like there was a clear opportunity and used more than once to pull specific things off. And in that sense, what remains, I think should be supported. And so I support this motion. And I think it's important to be thoughtful about those, but also understand a little bit of the language that we talk about when we talk about surpluses. This is not bonus money that we didn't spend. It was intended to be spent, but wasn't spent for likely some unplanned reasons. So a project couldn't go ahead for some reason, or there were staff away for whatever reason. These are unplanned reasons that a surplus exists. And so it's I think the intention when a budget happens is to spend the money and only spend the money that has been budgeted for. But some things come up, and the question then is, what do we do with the money that couldn't be used despite our best intention to spend that money that year in the budget? And like I said, we've had the opportunity to go through these different reserves in this meeting and pull ones out or give different direction. And what remains, I think should be supported, and so I'll support this motion.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, because I think that, you know, I don't want to talk about future policy, but I think a new future policy can be nuanced and can deal with the different reasons why there's surplus, because that's one of the key points is there's different, and getting, you know, underlying some of the comments by others, there's reasons why there's surplus, but the why matters. Is it because we deferred a project? We didn't do it last year, we're doing it next year. Well, that's one thing. Did we save money? Did our staff find something cheaper? We had a bonus. Was it a short windfall? Was our interest higher? Was it, or cancel the project, or, you know, and the what should be done in those contexts matters. And also I think scale, is it a, you know, talking about 2% of the service, why do we waste our time versus, you know, huge amounts? I think that a policy can deal with that, and a policy wouldn't also force anything. I think it would provide guidance to the future board to work through, and for staff to report, we'd work through, and it would at least help avoid, because right now we have this big table, we've had this less structured discussion that could be more focused if we had a policy that would say these are the 4 things that we might draw our attention to, and the rest are really in this, you know, this way or that way, and it's just dealt with. But we're not talking about that. That will be coming to us, and I think you know, I look forward to it. We can talk about all the ways we can make sure it's guidance for staff, guidance for us. But right now we're talking about this policy, this motion. Motion. Okay, I'll leave it there. Any further debate on this motion? I don't see any. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Director Gregoric opposed. Otherwise, it passes. Okay, thank you. That's fine. Okay, so now we're on to item 5, which is that any additional changes directed by motion at this meeting be advanced directly to our meeting March 18th today for incorporation into the financial plan.
Moved.
Seconded by George. Discussion on this. This is just popping it up for. No hands up, so I'll call the question on it. All in favor? Opposed? That's good. And the last one is that the finance committee refer the service schedules to staff and direct staff to incorporate the service schedules into the 2026-2023 financial plan through the March 25th board meeting first through adoption. So first, it's moved, seconded. Discussion.
Question. Does this one have to be elevated to the board meeting, or is?
I don't think so, because
A
the
motion to refer to staff, sorry, thank you through the chair.
Yeah.
Is it in order to direct us to do it?
Okay. In that case, I have no issues with the motion. I'm ready to vote in favor.
Okay, great. And I just have actually one question, which is tangentially related. I meant to ask it earlier. And it's the last draft 2, we had a lot of the actuals, and the actuals changed. And I think we have somehow not quite a reconciliation, but the statement of financial, and then there's other stuff that comes forward with 2025. So the question from Greenan is, what do we see about the 2025 budget? I mean, hopefully it's more or less nailed down, but are we going to see anything further with that, or will it be summarized and then in the Sophie in April, May? Is this just to lay out how we close off 2025 and what we might see related to that, and then we can hopefully put a button on it and leave it in the room.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. So what you'll see is at the March 25th board meeting, you'll see the actual financial plan bylaw. And then also in that report, I'll just, outline again what the tax implications look like. And then the only time you'll see it again will be, when you see I'll bring forward I can bring forward the financial plan just to show you what the actuals are after all of the audit is completed. If you would like, I can bring that report forward, but we don't usually like to bring a report showing the actuals until the audit is done, because then we can have true actuals on the plan.
I'm not asking for any further information. I wanted, it's just so we know, because we have the actuals from last time. We know they've changed, but no extra work for staff. Just there will be a little bit more coming forward when that gets finalized, and the auditor has to see what we did in 2025 to make sure we're all on the up and up. But, so there will be a little bit more coming, and then we'll in the normal course of ordering that down.
One thing I did want to mention, if I could, through the chair. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention too, just again, now that we are going to use a lot of these surpluses in the 2026 budget, the 2027 budget, just to caution you, it might, there might look like a big tax increase if we don't have the same types of prior year surpluses to again bring forward. So just so you know, that might be what happens.
Down so much, if waste management goes up a little bit, it'll look
exponentially bigger,
starting from a lower level. Yeah, the politicians of that day will have to wear it. Good point. But thank you for that.
Good point.
But that's always good to keep in mind, because it's all where we're going. Anyway, won't go too far off track. So we have that motion. Is there any further discussion? Take it off track any further than that, other than call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? We have finished the budget almost. For finance. My job's finished. Now that's it. I don't think there's anything more. No new business, no question period. No timer. Hang on. Question. Oh, maybe Mr. Galinsky's still with us. Are you still there?
I am, Chair. Thank you very much.
I was jumping over you there. If you have any questions, go ahead.
I do have a question, and that's going back to item 8.1, which was the grant funding for fire services, Chair. Was the grant that was turned down the $30,000 for each of the regional fire departments?
Yes, it was. I'll let Mr. Toms answer that.
Yeah, if I could, through the chair, it was the through the UBCM, the CEPF Volunteer Firefighters Composite Training and Equipment Grant.
I'm wondering if the general manager could apprise me of what the application was for specifically from the UBCM for the various fire departments.
In this year's, through the chair, in this year's application, it was some necessary firefighting equipment for each of the 4 fire departments.
I thank the manager for his response. Chair, that was my question. Thanks for the
Any other
opportunity.
information on that, we can provide to you offline if you want on what's included in there. And all of the expenses are generally remain in the budget, so the fire departments will still buy that equipment.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry for jumping over that. I am back on track. We have now we have no one camera, no one in the room. I don't think there's anyone else online, so we are
We got
adjourned.
5 minutes here.
Great.
That's amazing.
Shut down.
Not time to go anywhere.
Recording stopped.
Rick, everybody.